Hi everyone, welcome to our webinar today. The topic of today's webinar is the real estate industry and selling homes with solar. This webinar is being presented by the Clean Energy States Alliance, also known as CESA, and it is being hosted by Warren Leon. Warren is the Executive Director here at CESA. We have two excellent guest speakers with us today, and before I pass it over to them to get our webinar started, I'd like to go over a few quick housekeeping notes. All of our attendees for this webinar are in listen-only mode. You have a couple of options to join the audio portion of this webinar. You can connect using a computer, mic, and speakers, or you can call in using a telephone. If you would like to minimize the webinar console so that you can view the webinar full screen, you can click on the little orange arrow that you see circled here, and you can also use that arrow to expand the webinar console. We will be saving about 15 minutes at the end of our webinar for a Q&A with the audience, so we encourage you to submit your questions and your comments by typing them into the question box on your webinar console and hitting send. We will get to as many questions as we can. To make sure that we get to your question, type it in when you think of it. Don't wait until the very end. We do expect to have a lot of people on the line today, and that means a lot of questions. So make sure that we get to your question by typing it in when you think of it. A final note, this webinar is being recorded. We will send you an email within about 48 hours with a copy of the webinar recording and a link to a PDF of the slides. And we'll also be posting all of those webinar materials on our website at cesa.org/webinars. This is a good place to find any of our webinar recordings or links and information for upcoming webinars. So with that, I would like to pass it over to our host for today's webinar. As I said, our host today is Warren Leon. He is the Executive Director of the Clean Energy States Alliance.
Hey, thanks very much, Samantha. The Clean Energy States Alliance is a national organization composed primarily of state agencies, but we also have some other public agencies who are involved in our organization, and you could see all their logos here up there on your screen. We exchange information among our members. We help them implement and identify exemplary clean energy programs. And on top of the work we do with our members, we do a variety of outreach and education for broader audience, including all of you folks on the call today. We are especially interested in issues at the moment having to do with solar and solar consumer protection, and today's webinar falls in that rubric. Before I turn to the webinar, I want to say one other thing. CESA is a nonprofit organization, and we rely on contributions and grants and membership dues to allow us to put on these events like today's webinars. And so when you're thinking of your year-end gifts, if you appreciate what CESA does, please send us a donation of $25, $50 or more. We would love to have any of it, and will allow us to continue these sorts of activities. You'll find a link to donate on our website, which is www.cesa.org. If we could go to the next page. Well, up till now, most of the attention with solar has been focused on how to get it on people's houses and how to get it installed. But now there are a large number of houses out there in the real world with solar on them, and some of those folks will need to, for a variety of reasons, sell their houses. And how do we ensure that sellers and real estate agency staff and other folks in the real estate industry know what they need to know to make wise decisions about their solar houses? That's what we're going to be talking about today. And we have two excellent speakers with us today. I will introduce the first one now, and we'll introduce the second one when it's her time to speak. Our first speaker is Janelle McGill, who's a realtor a National Association of Realtors Green Designee, and an energy efficient renovation consultant in Colorado. She lives in Fort Collins, where she practices real estate, um, primarily in northern Colorado, and she teaches a continuing education course on solar and real estate, which she offers to real estate agents around the state. And she's going to share some of the messages she gives to those real estate agents when she is doing her continuing education course. So let me turn it over to Janelle.
Hi, everyone. This is Janelle McGill. And first, thank you to CISA and Samantha and Warren for facilitating this webinar and just bringing everybody into this conversation. I think this is a great opportunity to start discussing, like you said, Warren, this is becoming a real issue in real estate, and we have the numbers to prove it. So I appreciate everybody that's coming and listening in, and let's talk about some of the issues that homeowners face. I'm going to primarily discuss what those issues are when they try to sell their homes with solar, because now there are enough of them. And I did struggle to whittle this presentation down to 20 minutes, so I might go a little fast, but I think we're going to have plenty of time at the end to answer any questions or maybe elaborate on any specific subjects that are of interest to our audience today. First, I'm going to talk about the graph of what we're talking about here. These are real numbers, and this is the actual solar permits that have been in Colorado in our city of Fort Collins for the last 10, 11 years. And this probably looks very similar to a lot of other cities across the country where solar is also feasible. What I'm seeing in real estate is that, like Warren said, for decades, we were trying to get adoption to start rising. And now that we're here, we're talking about some real numbers. And so while before the numbers were so minimal that it didn't really warrant wide-scale attention, certainly in the real estate industry, but with increases like this, we're talking about a significant portion of the homes hitting the market every year happen to have solar or green building features as part of it. If you add to that the amount of time that a homeowner stays in their home, which is currently 8 to 11 years, that means that a home with solar is going to end up changing hands 2 to 3 times during a 25-year warranty period. That growing market segment shows why there's a need for the real estate industry education. And we're not talking about just agents, but lenders, insurers, appraisers, solar providers, the installers, as well as the homeowners. So the more information we can share and distribute by facilities like this, then the fewer barriers homeowners are going to see when they do sell solar, which is going to end up increasing adoption overall. This is a graphic that I created for the American Solar Energy Society conference this summer, just to illustrate how many transaction partners the agents actually touch in a sale. And this is why I feel it's so critical that the agent themselves understands the process. And if they can't, why we can then pass that over to the homeowner to be in charge. I'll go through the parties briefly to explain their role when solar is involved, starting with the agents up top. First of all, the agent's listing agent and a buyer's agent. The listing agent should have the experience with valuation, marketing, and being able to educate others on solar. The same is going to apply to the buyer's agent. If they can explain the system to the buyer and the buyer feels confident in their decision to buy the house, then the transaction is going to go smoothly. The appraiser has the responsibility to add value to homes with energy efficient upgrades, with one big caveat: if the market allows. If they don't have the proper education to appraise a specialized home, they're not going to find that added value. This is where the real estate agent can step in to request specific education or stop the appraisal from happening to avoid the lengthy problems that can happen when you try to contest an appraisal. The lender doesn't need to be as informed as the first two, but they need to have some idea about solar and how homes with energy efficient upgrades are different. They need to know how to request those qualified appraisers and why they're doing so. Insurance companies can be great or not so great. Almost all charge a higher premium when you add solar to the house. and most cover the removal and replacement of the panels if the roof has to be replaced due to an insurance claim. But some don't cover those charges, which can then mean that after a hailstorm, which is a very common occurrence here in Colorado, the homeowner will have to pay their deductible, then they have to pay a solar company to come out and remove and replace those panels, and in some cases, they're also going to have to pay a reinspection fee from the building department. So one claim can end up wiping out all of the utility savings since they installed the system if it's only been a couple of years since they installed. The title representatives aren't involved much more than with a normal home, with the exception of when there's a solar lease on the property. If the proper lease transfer documents have been completed at least a week before closing, then it can ensure that there are no last-minute issues with the loan funding as it relates to the lease. The local utility provider is involved, how I feel, in two ways. They're indirectly involved because the utility bills are used as a marketing tool on the property, and they help document the solar production. They are directly involved because their policies and fees dramatically affect the benefits of the PV system, whether they charge any additional fees and how much those are, whether they allow net metering and what that rate is compared to the actual utility rate, all affect how appealing a system is to a buyer that might only be interested in lowering their utility bills. The original solar provider has usually long since left the picture, but if records are missing or if the buyer needs help accessing the online production monitoring system, then we usually end up reaching out to them to ask them to help set that all up. The drawback to needing their records is that often the small companies are already out of business. So unless the homeowner has kept great files, there may be no way to get the documentation needed for both the appraisal and to pass on to the buyer. And the building inspector has no involvement in the actual transaction unless the system is either brand new, which unfortunately happens sometimes, or the panels are being reinstalled, possibly because a roof has had to be replaced during that contract period. The way that they affect the transaction is whether they charge for those reinstallation inspections. Those fees can add up, and if the homeowner does have to remove panels for any reason, this can be an added charge that just keeps nicking away at their financial return. I already hit on a few of these while discussing those different transaction partners, but these are the common problems that I see that homeowners are facing when they have a home with solar that's hitting the market. First, buyer hesitation. It may be surprising to those of us that champion solar, but not everybody wants it. Most of this hesitation is really just because it's unknown to them. They don't know the benefits. They worry about insurance claims and maintenance and upkeep and repairs. They worry about how long the warranty is and what it covers and what they have to do when the panels end up ending their life and need to be removed. While this also seems simple, this is something I also hear a lot about, is the holes in the roof. Did the installation happen properly? Is my roof safe? Who do I call if I have a leak? And is my roof okay with the weight of the panels on there? So these are all legitimate worries, and to us that champion solar, they're not a problem to answer, but for a lot of people, these are the things that keep them away. I have unfortunately heard both of these statements before. One, I don't show buyers homes with solar, and two, I talk buyers out of homes with solar because there's just too much unknown about it. So there are agents that just simply scare the buyer off with their own opinions, and this is irresponsible and it is against agent ethics, by the way, but it happens. And again, it's all due to a lack of understanding and education. Seller hesitation and issues. This is usually the smallest concern because sellers that put solar on their home love the solar that they put on their home. So it's usually not an issue for them to talk about it with a buyer. But when that isn't the case and a seller regrets committing to solar for one reason or another and then airs that experience, that reverberates so much further than a positive story does. So if they have a lease, also sellers can be surprised about the lack of value in the panels. And they can also be frustrated about the process of having to transfer that lease. They may also be terrible record keepers. And if a seller doesn't keep their solar information in a nice, convenient spot and all together, then the transaction can actually be pretty difficult to pull off. Valuation issues are next. If you can't find a qualified appraiser appraiser and the MLS green fields have not been properly filled out, then finding data to support the list price and any addition for solar can be really difficult. And finally, leases. There are certainly many reasons why you would do a solar lease, but an easier real estate transaction is not one of those reasons. Leases cause the most issues. Either the party that installed didn't fully understand what would have to happen in the sale, or that they have no real property that adds value, or the purchasing party just wants nothing to do with the strings that are now attached to the property. The buyers may simply be unwilling to assume the lease, leaving the seller in a position to either prepay the entire lease or remove the panels before the sale is complete. They can be unable to purchase the house because the lease payments that the buyers are now supposed to assume can increase your debt to income ratio up to a point where they can no longer afford the house. And this is a problem if they were already barely able to afford the house to begin with, which can happen in some of the more urban areas across the country where we're seeing housing prices go up pretty steeply, pretty quickly. Buyers are often right up against that line. If the buyer and the buyer's agents don't transfer the lease and get the documents to title in a short amount of time, then the closing can be delayed or canceled. Once again, someone with experience with leases can avoid all of this, so education's the key. To get an idea of what homeowners knew about this whole subject, I polled solar homeowners here in Fort Collins. Roughly 1 out of 4 knew that there was specialized training for agents and appraisers and that they have the right to request a properly trained partner. My slides are skipping ahead without me touching, so I'm not sure what's happening here, but let me go back one. There we go. To get an idea of what homeowners knew about the whole subject, I polled roughly 1 out of 4 knew that we had training, and even fewer were aware that we had green MLS fields or any specialty loan products.
Hey,
This is
Janelle, could you?
Yeah.
I got a couple questions already. Could you explain what an MLS greenfield is?
Yes. So across the country, and Pamela can talk to this a little bit too, because she's been pretty instrumental in trying to get this out. But the MLS is our multiple listing service, and that is where all properties are listed for each individual market. So here in Northern Colorado, we've got Boulder, Longmont, Fort Collins, Loveland, Greeley. All of us are in one MLS system, and there are actually fields in there that need to be entered that are specific to green buildings. So you have a lot of, if there's a certification on the home, or if there's solar, or if you have a solar thermal, if you have passive solar, all of those questions are asked, and you can fill in that information. And if you've done it correctly, then a buyer can actually search just looking for a house with PV on it, or just search for a house that has a LEED certification. And it also allows the appraisers to then do those searches when they're trying to look for comparable properties. Does that answer the question?
Yep, thank you.
Okay, sure. All right, let me see where, because these slides are skipping ahead. I'm not sure how, but they're kind of keeping up with me. Let me go to the next one here. And these are the number of realtors that have completed the, oh, you know what? I need to go back one because I want to talk about how many. Oh, that'll be the next one. Okay, I'm sorry. Now I'm back on track. So this is the number of realtors that have completed the NAR, so that's the National Association of Realtors Green Designation, which really, until Pamela has created this other class that she's going to discuss, this was really the only education out there for realtors. There is a similar designation by a different company outside of the National Association of Realtors that's an eco broker, and the content for both of these designations is very similar. These are the number of designees in our area compared to the total number of realtors. So as you can see, very few have received the specialized training. What's even worse, though, is that just having this green designation doesn't mean you necessarily understand how to conduct a transaction with solar. The course content is pretty superficial. there's a great overview of green building techniques and renewable energy systems, but there isn't much information about actually doing the real estate transaction. So Pamela will discuss this more and why she focuses on education that goes a lot deeper than the green courses. As of this summer, these were the available appraisers in our market, and we consider an appraiser, quote, qualified if they have taken these two courses, the Valuation of Sustainable Buildings, which is a professional development program, and the follow-up course called Residential and Commercial Valuation of Solar. So how do we request a qualified appraiser? If there aren't any, it's pretty tricky, but we still do. It doesn't always work, but the more we put that request out there, the more likely appraisers are to take notice and then go take these professional development classes. So we've covered a lot of the issues. How do we overcome some of these obstacles? Obviously, the largest obstacle is industry training. Each of these transaction partners, both individually and collectively, should seek education and guidance on everything green: solars, energy efficiency, green building features, certifications like LEED and Energy Star. The next step would be educating the actual homeowners that already have solar on their home. While it'd be nice if they always hired an agent with knowledge in this field, the reality is that nearly all of us, I'm sure most of the people listening in right now will laugh at this, but we all have a friend or a neighbor or a family member that's an agent and that we're going to use, regardless of whether they're educated on this particular subject or not. So we just can't reasonably expect that those agents are going to have the knowledge necessary. So if we focus on educating the homeowners, then the consumers will then have the tools they need to help facilitate their own transaction, which is a lot of pressure to put on a homeowner, but until we get the industry coming up to speed, giving them these tools is going to help demand that we go get the education. So as far as things that homeowners should know, the first step is making sure that they know the ownership structure of their PV system. While most know that they either leased it or purchased it, they often don't have a clear understanding of what that means for their home's value. If the installation company wasn't clear about this when reviewing the contract initially, the homeowner can feel misled. How to find a qualified real estate agent to handle that transaction and know what questions to ask them to make sure that their knowledge does go deeper than just that green designation. Do they understand the appraisal hurdle? Do they have a clear marketing plan? Do they have resources that they can provide to a buyer? Because it's important to make sure that the listing agent has all of these skills, because they're going to need to pass those resources over to the buyer and a buyer's agent. If a homeowner doesn't have an agent with adequate training, they also need to know whether their multiple listing surface has the green fields. Most markets, as I mentioned, have adopted these over the last few years, so they are way more popular than they were 3 or 4 years ago. So the homeowner needs to know whether they exist and then ask if they've been filled out correctly so that they can be used by buyers and appraisers in the future. And then knowing their right when it comes to requesting a qualified appraiser. What does qualified mean? They should know the names of those courses and how they can ask a lender for the buyer to request the appraisers with that training. And this is the question at the top of all sellers' minds, I'm sure. How much more is my home worth? Give me a number. The first step to document is to document what makes their house different from all the rest. The Appraisal Institute created a residential green and energy efficient addendum, which is where all of the system details are documented. And that can be filled out and then given to the appraiser to assist with the market valuation. Secondly, Pamela is going to be discussing this more in her presentation, but in my mind, this is one of the best things ever done to promote renewable energy for residences. In case you're not familiar with pvvalue.com, it's an easy-to-use valuation tool that gives a standardized answer to this question. And I say easy, it is easy, and it does give you a standardized, wonderful number at the end. It can take a little while the first time you use it. Gathering your records, knowing what's important in those records, and understanding your system enough to be able to explain it to a buyer. If a homeowner doesn't really grasp the benefits and intricacies of a home's feature, it's not going to instill confidence in that buyer. And this is something that should be prevented when a solar installer gives an estimate for putting panels on the roof. But I've seen a few solar PV systems that have been installed on roofs over 7 years old, and I'm not sure that there's a good conversation being had there about the drawbacks to doing it on an older roof. So that can be fine if the homeowner doesn't end up needing to sell in the next couple of years. But if they do, the buyers are almost always going to ask for that roof to be replaced, which will then have the added cost if it's not part of an insurance claim. That seller is going to end up having to pay a company to remove and replace those panels, as well as possible new inspection fees. And lastly, this one's pretty simple, but it's something that a lot of buyers don't get handed over to them, and that's the tracking system. That's knowing that performance monitoring system that most of the time comes with the panels or the inverters, and being able to track that and having the login information and the access to that. So a seller should really be prepared to provide that over to the buyer so that they can set it up right away. Again, a knowledgeable agent is going to do all of these without prompting from the homeowner, but we just don't know that these homes are all going to have a knowledgeable agent listing the property. So I understand that this kind of outreach may seem a little excessive, but by providing this information regularly to homeowners for maybe a few years, I think the industry is going to catch up, like I mentioned before. Homeowners are going to then have a better understanding of what's in their home and why their home is different from the others on the market. And then the real estate industry is just going to end up realizing they have to catch up to the green trend that is the future of real estate, or they're going to be left behind. So I don't think this education necessarily needs to be long-term, or it can be minimized to be something simple added into maybe the solar process at the front end. And I would call this outreach that I would like to see right now more of like a campaign, and it can be shelved once we see that the awareness is gaining some ground. The third piece of overcoming the obstacles in education and awareness would be to reach out to those interested in solar but don't know where to go to get their questions answered. And this includes buyers of homes with solar. The door-to-door sales model it really doesn't work for this. The public wants a systematized way to go solar, and the fear of the unknown is just so great, which is primarily why that neighborhood phenomenon exists, which all solar installers totally understand and they count on. That's where one house in the middle of a block installs and then multiple neighbors follow because it's no longer an unknown. Somebody they know and they trust did it, then shared their experience, and now those worries are alleviated. The pvvalue.com system is another piece of this standardization. So are platforms like Energy Sage that allow the public full access to information and an ability to request quotes without that door-to-door salesperson. So in the interest of brevity, I'm just going to show the points I feel are important, but we'll leave this discussion about public outreach for a different presentation. So how do we do this outreach, this education to everybody? I'm going to share my own small-scale solutions first. I've done two things in my local market. First is I send this card to all permit holders in Fort Collins. The front mentions that homes with solar and green features are listed and marketed differently so that they have some awareness of how their homes are different and should be treated differently. I tell them that for easy reference, you should store this with all of your solar information. And then on the back is a checklist that covers much of what I mentioned in that slide for homeowners with solar, but a little more abbreviated. I also teach a solar course to agents, and I also invite a lot of lenders and appraisers, some utility employees from Fort Collins Utilities, as well as solar providers to sit in on the class. And it's a 3-hour course, and I provide 3 hours of continuing education credit to agents, and I offer it for free. So as far as large-scale solutions, these are suggestions purely from my own experience in brainstorming. Some are not going to be feasible, others are probably cost prohibitive, but I'd love to see a more collaborative discussion around this topic. I feel like having this conversation is going to make solar more comfortable to adopt and make the resale market, or what I call the secondary market for solar, easier for buyers and sellers to navigate. First, I'd love to see the solar installers get more involved. I think it makes sense for them to offer more information to homeowners about how to navigate the whole of their 25-year warranty. Maybe they should use something similar to my rack card, and it could be required to be provided as part of a contract. At the solar conference this summer, I mentioned that homeowner education is an excellent opportunity for utility companies. There we go. It's just skipping ahead on me again. You know, who else of us, the government, CISA, the real estate industry, the solar installers, nobody reaches homeowners like the utilities do on a monthly basis. So I think this is an area that's still really untapped, and maybe we could create a utility brain trust to look into these topics and how we can relate useful information to the public. Or maybe it's something that could be taken on by CISA or individual state utility commissions to draft the information that they would like to see shared and then distribute it to the utilities. Talk to the building departments about streamlining the reinspection fees for renewables, and depending on the city and whether they have a climate action plan, a conversation around that initial cost of inspection could be had as well. Seems like a natural place to me to give homeowners a break if what they are doing is also in line with the city's goals. Maybe the state boards of realtors as well as local boards can share in the task of encouraging agents to seek deeper understanding of green building and energy efficiency and renewable energy as well. I touched on this one when I was discussing transaction partners, and most of the solar installation information is paper. So some homeowners keep it handy and others do not. If the solar installer has gone out of business, there's often nowhere else to go to get that replacement information, as far as I know. This can cause significant problems in a transaction with no warranty information and no manufacturer info for repairs, maybe no system details for the proper valuation. It makes a transaction pretty hard to pull off. So to prevent this, I've thought that maybe a database, perhaps not on a national level, but maybe on a state level or even just county, a place to store system components, warranty information, schematics and permits so that future homeowners can reference it, or the current homeowners can use it to list the home and the appraisers can use it to value the home. As we move closer to blockchain transactions for various purchases, including real estate and government processes, I can see this being an easier thing to adopt. I'm just not so sure about it now, but I know that I've wished for it at least once, so it's enough for me to mention it today. And finally, in order to help the general public feel more comfortable about going solar, I'd love to see the resources we do have, things like Desire and Energy Sage and research from NREL, shared on a broad scale. The solar industry is so different because most information is still delivered door to door. So people are wary of this and they want one place to go for unbiased information so that they can make an informed decision. And as far as I'm aware, and maybe there's something out there I'm not aware of yet, but I don't think there's a single mass access point or publication that provides this outside of something like Energy Sage. So concentrating information in a single source would help the general public and the homeowners that have solar, and it'll also help the solar industry's reputation in general. So that's it. I'm sure I could spend much more time diving deeper into these issues, but I've made Pamela wait long enough. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Janelle.
Sure.
Let's move on to our second presentation. And let me introduce Pamela Brookstein to you. She's a project manager for Elevat Energy, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to making certain that the benefits of energy efficiency reach those who need them most. She works in particular to ensure that high performance homes, which are those that include clean energy and efficiency in energy and water, are consistently and fairly valued when bought and sold. To accomplish this goal, she works with various sectors of the real estate community, and she's helped develop and launch 3 solar education classes for real estate professionals. Pamela, you're on.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Warren. Yeah, I am going to be talking about the work that Elevat is doing in this world of solar education and real estate agents. And I feel like Janelle beautifully explained that solar, while absolutely fantastic, can add some complications to the selling process, which is already a somewhat fraught process. I've just been through it, and there's quite a bit of emotion going around already. So I'll jump right into the work that elevat's doing here. In 2016, with funds from the U.S. Department of Energy, Elevate created classes for real estate agents and appraisers that, among some other topics, really do explain how to determine a listing price for a home with solar. With that funding from the DOE, we created 3 classes, online classes for both agents and appraisers, and a live class for appraisers. And the classes all offer continuing education credit, and the online classes are fantastic because they're on demand, so people can take them from anywhere at any time if they don't happen to live close to Janelle, and can take her amazingly free 3-hour class. Elevate Energy has just turned the online real estate class into a live class, and I will start teaching it across the country next year. So I'm going to be focusing, though, on the class that we designed for real estate agents specifically. Again, it's 3 hours. We have continuing education credits in 21 states for the online class, and we'll obtain CE approval on a state-by-state basis as needed when we do offer it live. And that's the website, so you can read more about the class. It's currently hosted on the National Association of Realtors online education platform. So, but before I really jump into this, which I guess I've already done, I do want to back up a little bit and talk about the reasons for engaging real estate agents in the first place. I want to explain why we think that real estate is such a stakeholder that is crucial to this process. And Janelle talked about it as well, but I'm going to offer up a couple more statistics here. And that's that even though people are first using online platforms to initially look for homes, they eventually turn to agents to help them through the buying and selling process. 87% of buyers and 89% of sellers are using real estate agents. And I don't know if anyone knows, but there are actually over 2 million real estate agents out there. There were 5.1 million homes sold in 2017. And what I love about the real estate industry is that they're working with homes that list for $2 million and homes that list for $200,000. They're talking to people everywhere, every day. And the really good ones are trusted sources of all kinds of information for their clients. So for instance, I've been friends with my real estate agent for 20 years, since he helped me buy the house I currently live in, actually. And since the beginning, he's helped me make decisions around upgrades that I've considered making to my house. He tells me what's worth it and what's not. And actually, just recently, he helped me choose the type of kitchen countertop that I should go with. So there are rockstar agents out there that really are a trusted source of information for their clients. So real estate agents who understand solar, who aren't afraid of it, who understand how it works, that know how to value it, they're going to be able to help their sellers market their solar home so that it's fairly valued at the time of sale. And on the buyer side, they can help their clients understand what solar could really be worth to them. And that's how we get to market transformation. When homeowners see that others are getting benefits from solar, both in the short term and in the long term, they'll be more willing to consider and ultimately invest in solar. So it's good for us to engage real estate agents, but why would real estate agents, there we go. Why would real estate agents want to learn about this topic? I think it's really important to remember that real estate agents are business people, and they should be treated as such. That if they are going to focus on a topic, it needs to be good for their business, and so we have to pitch it that way. If solar can help them build their business, if it can help agents stand out in this crowded field of over 2 million agents across the country, if it helps their seller increase their selling price, then it becomes worth it for them to learn about this topic. So with that in mind, elevat set out to create a class that fit those needs, that really spoke to what would resonate with a real estate agent, that would have information that allowed them to have informed conversations with clients, but that didn't assume they needed to be solar engineers. So we gathered a team of solar experts, and we had guidance from actual real estate agents who are working with solar and the National Association of Realtors, and we created a class focused on the real estate agent's role in the transaction. The class has 5 modules, and I'll just quickly explain what we cover. So that first module, the emerging solar PV market, it's there to build the business case for learning about solar. This is what I was saying, that we have to explain to real estate agents why it's worth it for them. I just gave this class in Chicago, and there's not a lot of understanding that solar is a thing here. So I had to make that case for them that it was worth it to learn about it. In Module 2, we give a brief overview of the main pieces of the system and explain how the systems convert the sun's energy into energy that's usable at home, with, again, out going into terribly much detail. I sit next to a solar engineer at work who's I think I break his heart every time he takes a look at the class, because he wants more detail, but there's only so much that we actually do need to know when we're out there selling houses. In 3, we talk a lot about exactly what Janelle brought up is really an obstacle, which is about homeowner-owned versus third-party owned systems. We cover the main ways that people are financing their systems and how these options affect the real estate transaction and the appraisal, and what to do about them. And yes, how leases need some special care and attention when you're dealing with systems that have been funded that way. And then in 4, we get to, I love this module because we talk about the ways to make the benefits of the system stand out in an MLS listing. And we specifically talk about ways to help the agent not get themselves into trouble. We're seeing across the country that some agents are making guarantees of performance, which is a horrible way to open yourself up to liability. And then, of course, there are a lot of agents that don't understand the difference between homeowner-owned and third-party owned systems. So we talk about that and how to talk about it in a listing. And then we talk about what documents that agents need to get from homeowners and what information the appraiser needs when creating their report. So exactly what Janelle talked about, that sadly, homeowners just don't necessarily, and we're talking about me as well, don't keep all of their documents in one neatly labeled file. So we explain here are the things you should ask for, including that performance monitoring report. And then in 5, just like Janelle said, we help agents figure out how to establish a listing price for a home with solar. We walk through PV value step by step. It's an online tool that creates a value for the PV system, and it uses the income approach to appraising. And what's fantastic about this report is that it's defendable and it's objective and it shows your math. And so that's perfect for the appraiser and for the lender, and of course for the buyer as well. And so that's the class. And we have an evaluation at the end where we ask for feedback, and it's been overwhelmingly positive, which has been great to hear. We've had 2 people say that it's the the best distance learning class that they've taken, or one of the best. And somebody even said that it was fun, which made me incredibly happy. And students specifically are saying that learning how to create a value for their system is the most important takeaway from the class. And then a close second, agents are reporting that they like the information about the financing methods and how those affect the real estate transaction. And that's all I really wanted to talk about this class. Here's my information. Please feel free to contact me if you have questions about the class or how to get people there.
So, very good. Good, excuse me. This is Warren. We received a large number of questions and comments, and before I start asking some of those, I want to say two things. Among folks who send comments rather than questions, we will make sure those get passed on to both of our speakers today. And some questions really relate to net metering rules in a particular state or policy in a particular state. We're not going to be able to get into state-by-state analysis here. So I'm going to ask some of the more general questions. And one that came up is, do you have any insights into how ground-mounted systems at homes do in terms of resale value, or do those pose special questions, or do we just not have enough data about ground-mounted systems to really know?
I can answer a little bit. This is Janelle. They do add value almost identically in places where there's space to do that as the roof-mounted do. The difference is that the insurance company counts those different. So those are classified into a different category on your homeowner's insurance, and sometimes that can change what those rates are and whether that's more attractive or less attractive. A lot of the solar adoption is happening in urban areas, or it's happening for off-grid areas. So we're right up against the mountains in Colorado, so we see tons and tons in city right next to other houses, and there just isn't, frankly, space in the yard for that. But you do see a lot of ground mounted once you get outside of town and in the mountains, where people need a little more off-grid flexibility. They might still be tied into the grid, but it's a lot less reliable, say, in the winter when you have snowstorms. So, and that ends up, it's serving the exact same purpose. It's utilities, and they're able to provide for themselves, so they definitely add value. But I think we're not seeing as much data when you're talking about in town, just because the space isn't there.
Good. Pamela, a couple people asked about the Elevate Energy class and wondered if those classes are open to folks who aren't real estate agents.
Yes, actually, we've had quite a few non-real estate agents take the class. So if they just follow that website link.
Very good. And I'm not sure anybody will have an answer to this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. And this went to your thing, Janelle, about a centralized database. Somebody was saying that most utilities collect detailed information on systems as a requirement for the interconnection agreement, and whether those utility interconnection applications could be used as a resource for creating some sort of database or referring back to it in the future.
That is a great question, and something I've actually brought up with our Fort Collins Utilities Company. We are in a little bit of a unique position here, very fortunate actually, because our utility company is community owned. So, but what that also means is that there's no funding for something like this, where they could collect and try to keep track of all of the information. I think if a system was set up and handed to them, And it was done as part of the interconnection agreement, where then that file would just transfer under this person's property name over to this person's property name. I think that's definitely doable. You just have to talk them into it.
Okay, that makes good sense. How about multifamily houses and systems on condos? Do those do those folks need the same sort of information and advice, and the real estate agents who handle those transactions need the same sort of information and advice, or is there additional information they need and additional issues that they need to address?
Those, we do have quite a few here in Fort Collins. We actually have some net zero neighborhoods that are designed with that in mind. So some of the townhouses have panels on the roof. The way that those were designed is that the panels are literally on each individual roof. So in a townhouse situation, if you've done the roof orientation correctly so that you can put a system individually on the roof and not have to go on to any other homeowner's property, then it's a much easier transaction to complete. If you're talking about a condo situation where they've been placed on the roof and it's a collaborative ownership, then those are a little more difficult. And it's hard to transfer those properties because you have to get into the details of who's responsible. If there's a warranty claim, then is the HOA going to be responsible for 100% of the solar? So it does get a little more complicated when you get into multifamily, and it really comes down to how that structure was set up with the actual building itself to start with, and how well it was done to be able to allow solar to be added in the future. If you have maybe one building at the end, or one unit at the end that has the perfect roof, and then everyone wants to share in that, you're going to have to create something with attorneys to decide how that ownership structure is going to be broken out.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
One of the listeners made an analogy to purchasing an automobile and said, look, when purchasing a used car, you need to look under the hood and have a mechanic look at it before buying. Do purchases of solar, should they have a mechanic or a solar professional inspect the solar system before they buy the house?
I would love that. I would love for there to be a system like that, because I think that for a buyer makes it a lot easier. So for instance, I think everybody probably listening has done a transaction or two or four in their lives, but one of the processes in there is an inspection. Those housing inspectors do not know anything about solar, and very few know anything about green building, so they don't know about better insulation or quality of the home necessarily. So finding an avenue where, without a lot of added expense, because that having those inspections, it costs a buyer $600 to $800. They don't want to spend another $600 to $800 to have another qualified inspector come out and do it. So I think that's definitely a gap in the system. I usually encourage them to call the original installation company, which is hopefully usually still in business, and ask them to come out and kind of a pro bono, have a discussion with the buyer, tell them whether, everything up there looks a-okay, if it was done according to the permit. This is especially important if it's ever had to be removed and replaced. Knowing who put that back up there and who's responsible if something's wrong does end up being a problem.
Okay. One of our listeners points out that the California Public Utility Commission is going to be putting together a solar information package that consumers need to see and read before interconnecting their systems in main IOUs. And the Illinois Power Agency is requiring some disclosures, standardized disclosures and consumer information be given to consumers before they enter into a contract for a solar system. So we're moving in that direction more, and a number of states also have produced state guides to solar. But is there any but these things don't deal with selling the house. Is there anything
Right.
good in writing that is available now to share with sellers that would walk them through all the issues you folks have talked about in your presentations?
Well, my rack card that I send out. But yeah, I mean, that's the kind. I know that here in Colorado, we haven't seen anything quite like that. I have heard about California. I was unaware of Illinois. But if you have an overall association in the state kind of managing the information that all of those different utilities provide, I think that's really the best solution, because then each state can monitor that and share that information. But a lot of what is being shared is what they need to know about grid, what they need to know about the meters and their responsibilities being connected to the utility system. They don't necessarily talk about this, like you were saying, of the next 25 years and how many times these houses end up changing hands and how to handle that. So I just think that's where it can be added, and it can be added pretty simply by just sharing these bullet points and a lot of the topics that I say on the back. Again, I don't want to put all of this weight on a homeowner that they've got to understand how to be a real estate agent and do this. They just need to know that this stuff exists so that they can ask the right questions. And Pamela mentioned this, that the market transformation, it comes from trust. So as long as the trust it's gonna happen, because homeowners and buyers know that there's a process out there and there are people that they can call on to help them. And as soon as they know that all of this is being taken care of somewhere, then the market's going to transform, and installations and adoption are going to keep skyrocketing. But right now, this really all does feel like an unknown, and that's why I think that the utilities can really take a leading role in closing these gaps.
Good. Well, I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to give both of you an opportunity to say anything you haven't had a chance to say yet, or to reemphasize a point you want to emphasize. But the last question from the audience I want to ask: how do you deal with sellers, or how should real estate agents generally deal with sellers who have been misinformed by solar companies promising additional value on lease systems, and then when they go to sell, they may not see the value that they were expecting?
Pamela, do you want to take that one? I keep answering.
No, I actually think it makes more sense for you to answer that.
This is an issue. This happens a lot, and it is actually pretty rare that an installation company has given them the exact right understanding of what they can expect. And like I mentioned too, there's also a lot of gaps happening about that third party ownership and what that means. They might have initially had the conversation with a seller or a homeowner that's installing, and they were thinking about buying, and then as the process moves along, they've decided to lease instead, and they've never gone back to explain what that means as far as real property. So it's an uncomfortable conversation, but you have to have it. And luckily, things like PV value give you a hard number, and that's the only thing that an appraiser can use, because until we have enough data in the system, which means people have been using those MLS green fields to list properties, and that they're actually updating all of their listings to show that they have solar, then the appraiser is not going to find any information. So it's pretty likely here still in Fort Collins that an appraiser is going to find zero value added for solar. And that does not make homeowners happy at all, because it's definitely not the story they were told. So having these honest conversations and trying to maybe close down a little bit of that overpromising that solar installers are doing. I don't know if they need to I'd like them to also be brought into this PV value system, because then they can get an accurate estimate instead of using maybe old. I know I was talking to our utility, somebody that does the solar rebates, and there was one company that said, oh, we help everybody that does installations with our accounting software, and all of their rates were off. They were 2 years old.
Yeah.
So if that's the information that the solar companies are using, it's not accurate.
Okay, good point. Well, let's give Pamela an opportunity to say anything you haven't had a chance to say yet, or to reemphasize a point you want to leave people thinking about as they go to their next activities.
Yeah, I'd like to reiterate a point that I made, and that's that if we really want to engage this early group of real estate agents, if we are going to convince them that it's in their best interest to learn about solar, then we have to make sure that we treat them as business people, which is what they are. They're all small business people. And so we need to value their time and value what they do and what they can do to help with market transformation and to help their sellers and their buyers with solar.
Great. And Janelle, do you have any famous last words for folks?
I guess one thing is that a lot of this information can seem kind of overwhelming, and then it starts to feel like, oh my gosh, why would I even go with solar, because this is so complicated. And sometimes homeowners feel that way when they see that there are extra steps that need to be done. But the more often this happens and the more conversations like this that we can have across the country, the easier this is going to be. And no two transactions are alike. So if one has solar, that's fine. As long as everybody knows what they're doing, it's easy to get taken care of, and it doesn't have to be that complicated.
That's a nice point to end on, that it isn't that complicated. And it is also Pamela's point about making sure we understand the needs and perspectives of real estate agents when we engage them. That's an important point as well. I'd like to thank both of you for excellent presentations. Thanks to everybody who listened in. I'm sorry I didn't get to all the questions and comments. We will be sharing them with the presenters so they'll know what you had to say. So hope you join us for future webinars. Bye.